Oh, hi, and welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you stopped by because today you're going to hear from a young registered nurse. Her story is inspiring, yet at times may break your heart a little bit. But the good news is that this story ends well. Also, this episode is for every student or practicing nurse or direct healthcare provider. It'd be wonderful for them to kind of hear this story as well. So, before we hear from our guests, I invite you to join me in a 1 minute centering exercise to focus our minds and prepare our hearts to be present during this time. This show is all about healing. Every episode I do is all about healing. So I demonstrate a technique that you can use on your own to calm your mind, your body, your spirit. And so today, we're going to use our breath to bring a sense of relaxation and calm to this session. And using your breath as a self care practice is especially worth considering if you're a person who finds meditation difficult. So, for just 1 minute, I'll guide you to do the 3, 4, 5 breath method. And so if you're not, haven't been with me before, let me just guide you on how we breathe before we start the 3, 4, 5 breath method. So you're going to breathe in slowly through your nose. And then when you breathe out through your mouth as if you're blowing out a candle, okay, or blowing through a straw. Okay, so let's get started. It also helps if you lower your gaze and close your eyes. Um, Lower your gaze or close your eyes, whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay, so let's try it. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to breathe in 1 and 2 and 3, hold it 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now breathe out slowly 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Let's try it again. Breathe in 1 and 2 and 3. Hold it 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now breathe out through your mouth. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Let's get one more in. Breathe in through your nose. 1 and 2 and 3. Hold it 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Last time out. Breathe out 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Okay, so when you slow down your breath, you can send messages to your brain that you are safe, that things are calm, and you can reduce your stress and promote relaxation. So put that in your toolbox, okay? So for those of you who've just joined us, I am Dr. Paulina Van, the author of Regala Healing, a book of 100 healing poems, and the host of this show, The Poetry of Healing. And we've just completed a centering exercise activity to quiet our mind and focus on self during today's show. And a young nurse will take us on her journey of being unjustly accused of diverting drugs at work. To promote ease of the experience of her telling her story, we recorded this interview a couple days ago. So I'm going to play it for you now. Okay, so hang on, let me get it up. Here we go. Okay, so welcome, Ariana. I am just really, really honored and humbled that you agreed to tell your story. Um, and I've given the viewers a little backdrop already, but I'd like you to tell the viewers a bit about yourself, anything you feel comfortable personally or professionally. And then we'll talk about the trials and your triumphs after being unjustly accused of diverting drugs at work. And let's break it down for the viewers. It's you were accused of stealing drugs at work. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, my name is Ariana Weisinger. I graduated nursing school in 2019, May of 2019, from Samuel Merritt. I went off to work in Maryland in August, well, July, August of 2019, and came back to work in California around January 2021. And since then, I've been back in California and working, mostly as a travel nurse. I did staffing for about maybe 6 months between traveling. Then I went back, and I'm currently still a travel nurse right now.
Mhm. So explain to the viewers what a travel nurse is.
A travel nurse is basically a nurse that takes on different contracts at hospitals, usually in different states. So most travel nurses don't just stay in, one particular state. A lot of them go to multiple states. And assignments can be or contracts can be around. Well, during COVID, it was as short as 4 weeks, but usually travel contracts are about like 13 weeks and up. The average contract is 13 weeks, though.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
so, having been a nurse just about 4 years, I cannot believe that this time has gone by so fast.
Mhm.
And I'm your mentor. And
Yes.
so I've traveled this road with you, but 4 years already. But
Mhm.
it's important to know that because you have been a traveler or a traveling nurse going from hospital to hospital and state to state, that you've garnered an incredibly rich background, foundation in just 4 years.
Yes.
There are many benefits to working as a traveling nurse. Can you just give us a couple that you found? Um,
Well, the main benefit I can say is the flexibility. Instead of as far as like with staff nursing, a lot of times you have to get vacation time approved, sometimes upwards to a year in advance. As a travel nurse, you basically tell them the time you need off. And if management approves it, great. If they don't, then you just go to another hospital, get another contract at another hospital. So typically in a travel contract, I can take up to like two vacation times. So usually it's up to 2 weeks. So 2 weeks in 1 month, and I could probably take another 2 weeks off again a month after that.
mhm,
But yeah, I think the best thing is the flexibility and just being able to work when basically you want to work and take off time when you want to have time off.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well, you really navigated this really well, Ariana. And I'm going to add that because you're you're working in different hospitals, so you're not at one hospital all the time. You have developed this resilience and ability to respond to new and changes because every hospital is different.
Yes.
You're working with a different group of people. You're working with different policies and procedures and equipment. And
Mhm.
so I really want to impress upon you and also our viewers that you've really garnered, even though you've been licensed for 4 years, you may have garnered experiences of nurses who've been in the profession even longer than that. So kudos to you. So let's talk about unjust accusations. But before we do that, I'd like to just lay a groundwork about nursing in general for our viewers. So, nursing has been named by the Gallup poll the most trusted profession 22 years in a row. And it's even more years than that because since 1999, Gallup has included nurses in this survey. And so the only year since 1999 when nurses were not the most trusted profession was in 2001 when we had the 9/11 incident. So nurses are trusted. by our society. So, even given that, untrue, unjust uh, accusations happen more frequently than we can believe or even imagine,
Mhm.
because those complaints can be filed by anyone, they can be filed anonymously
Mhm.
and without evidence. Okay. So who's filing these complaints? It could be coworkers, supervisors, patients, or their families,
Mhm.
even a friend of yours, a frenemy,
Mhm.
a family member, anyone that um, may have gotten sideways with you can do this. And so the state acts first and asks questions later, and we're going to see that. So even though there are many accusations that nurses are accused of, today we're going to focus on those accusations related to drug diversion or stealing drugs at work. And so I'd like our viewers to learn a little bit more about you. And so you talked about your education and your initial jobs, but I want to know what inspired you to become a nurse.
Well, I would say first off, my mom said that I wanted to be a nurse like when I was very young, probably 8. I don't remember, but she said that I did. And I guess I revisited the idea when I was around 13, 14. And I made up my mind at that point that that's what I wanted to do. And I think what pushed me more into the purpose of becoming a nurse was having my grandpa and my dad be sick with cancer. So they passed when I was, 18, and then that's when I, went on to community college and started my prerequisites. And then when I was about 20, 23, I transferred over to Samuel Merritt. And then, I started the nursing program.
And
But
that's
basically life experiences, yeah.
and that's why I met you. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
I didn't realize that you were so fresh from losing two of your closest loved ones. So my
Yeah.
heart, my heart still goes out to you, even though it's
Thank
been
you.
years. You're welcome. Give us a little bit, tell us a little bit about the assignment, um, or the hospital that you were assigned to when this unjust accusation occurred. So, the location, not the city, but the type of location, the type of unit, and the patients, your coworkers, overall feeling when you were working on the unit.
Okay, so I had taken an assignment in like a rural area. Um, it was at a smaller hospital, like they call it a community hospital. And basically, the floor was, I think we were responsible for being floated to about like 3 units. So it ranged from like med surge tele, and some patients on the floor were also step down unit patients, but they were cardiac. So I wasn't designated to take care of those patients, just specifically med surge tele. So I did float between about 3 units. When I got there, I realized that most of the floor was travelers. They really didn't have many staff nurses on the unit. And it was a pretty big, the amount of beds on each unit was probably like 30 beds or so. And we had like 3 pods that nurses could sit at. So the unit was pretty big. Um, I mean, my first, the first thing I thought when I got on the unit was basically, okay, it's a lot of travelers. A lot of the nurses they had there that were staff for new grad nurses. And then they had nurse supervisors who had like the most seniority. So that's the main thing I had noticed just going on for was just, mostly travelers, quite a few new grads. And instead of charge nurses per se, they had nurse supervisors basically who acted as charge nurses. Yeah.
And so we're looking at a team of nurses with either minimal professional experience or
Mhm.
minimal experience with the hospital and the procedures and the equipment. So
Mhm.
we need to keep that, that in mind. It's a red flag, right? In
Yes.
retrospect, it's a
Mhm.
red flag. What was
Yes.
your overall feeling when you worked on the unit?
I mean, honestly, when I got on the unit, I'm generally an optimistic person. I come there to work and do what I can do.
Mhm.
So the main thing I was focused on was my patients. Now, I did notice, as like a red flag in the back of my head that it was a lot of travelers and not a lot of new grads. And honestly, even a lot of the nurses that had more experience didn't know a lot of basic stuff when us as travelers would come to them and ask them questions about their policies and procedures. So it was basically like some red flags going off in the back of my head. Also, another red flag was the fact that they didn't have any techs really. I think they had one tech for the whole unit. But me coming from Maryland as a new grad, I'm used to not having any help and doing things on my own because I know it'll be done the right way. So, I mean, that was a red flag, but I still did my job as best as I could. Um, and then I mean that was basically it as far as, what I was thinking and, when I got on the unit.
Well, you said you were focused on giving the best care to your patient. So even though you were making observations, you didn't let that take your energy. You
Yeah.
focused on the patient. So
Yeah.
so let's
Mhm.
talk about the accusation. Uh,
Mhm.
would you describe the circumstances or the events that led up to the false accusation?
Mhm.
And share with us your initial thoughts and emotions. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So before I was accused of anything, it seemed like it may have been a rumor going around the unit, but it turns out it was actually true that the state was investigating. Now this was travelers amongst each other speaking about this, so I didn't know for sure. And when they said the state was there, I didn't know if it was JACO or what other entity it was and necessarily why they were there investigating. So, I mean, I had kind of spoke to a couple of our travelers in passing, and they did, verify that this was going on. And then eventually the nursing supervisor during the day shift had verified that the reason why it was going on. But I still didn't have a clear picture as to why until I spoke to one more travel nurse, and they said that they were there investigating because of narcotics.
Mm,
So I was like, okay, like I've never been to a hospital before that was being investigated for narcotics. And it wasn't only narcotics, it was actually they were reported to the state also because of what's the basically the patient's family members were calling in on them because of some form of neglect that they felt that patients were receiving at the hospital. Um, so yeah, they were there for mostly narcotics being investigated and a couple of family members reporting mistreatment of their family members for whatever reason. I'm not sure, the backstory and which patients, that had family, reporting, but yeah.
yeah. So there was already some suspicion, um, and it was significant enough that the state felt that they needed to make a visit. And again, anyone can file a complaint against a nurse
Mhm.
or a hospital or a clinic, and
Mhm.
it is anonymous. Okay, so how did how did you become aware of the false accusation against you?
Okay, so I had a patient coming up from the emergency department. She was in a sickle cell crisis. I got a report in the ED. I think she had been in the ED for about 2 days. So in the ED for days, never was started on a PCA, which is the appropriate form of treatment for anybody in crisis. I think the only thing they wanted to give her was oral pain meds, which is ineffective. So when she got on the unit, I immediately started her on a PCA. But
Explain what that is for
so
the
PCA is it's basically a pump that a patient can push themselves where they can get a dose of pain medication. Now it can be continuous where they get it, regardless if they push the PCA button or not. And it can also be, on demand where they push it in order to get any pain medication. So before I had got the patient to come up to the unit, the charge nurse said, "Oh, are you sure you want to take this patient with the PCA pump? We usually don't get PCA pumps on the unit." I said, "Well, I mean, this is a med surg tele unit. Why wouldn't you guys take patients on PCAs? Like, it's basic nursing knowledge, to be able to use a PCA and set it up." So the patient got on the unit. I had to get, another nurse involved that actually knew the policy and procedure as to how they set their PCA pump up, because it was a red flag to me that the charge nurse told me they don't take PCA pumps on the unit. So I said, you know what? This is weird. Let me get charge nurse involved to set this PCA pump up with me so that there's no confusion. So we get the patient on the PCA pump, and then I give report and I go home. So I'm scheduled to work the next night, that night. So I come back that night, and the nurse is giving a report to me. And in report, the nurse tells me, okay, well, instead of pharmacy bringing the PCA syringes up, they're going to be putting them in the refrigerator instead. And I said, okay, in the refrigerator. Why would they be putting them in the refrigerator? So when I go in to, look and see where the syringes are literally in the refrigerator in a lockbox key that's not connected to the Pyxis at all. So that was a huge red flag for me, because I'm saying, okay, if it's not in the Pyxis, there's no way for them to account for how many PCA syringes are in the Pyxis. I mean, how many PCA syringes were delivered to the floor or anything. So when it was time for me to change.
Explain what a Pyxis is.
So Pyxis is a medication dispensing machine. So for narcotics specifically, anytime the pharmacy text comes in, loads any narcotics or any medications in the Pyxis, there's a count that's done, and that count is set in the Pyxis. So when a nurse comes or anybody comes to pull out any narcotics, there's a count done by the nurse to verify the correct starting count is there, and they're able to pull out the amount that they're, prompted to do from the Pyxis. So it's usually like 1. So if there's 4 syringes in the Pyxis and you're prompted to take 1, now the count is 3. So the Pyxis keeps everybody accountable for taking the correct amount of medications from the medication dispensing machine. So when this occurred and it was time for me to change my patient's syringe because the syringe is no longer full, I contacted pharmacy and let the pharmacist know that there's no way for us to account for the correct, syringes that were delivered to unit because it's not connected. And the pharmacist said, "Oh, well, we know," and basically kind of just shrugged it off like it wasn't a big deal. So I told him, I said, "Okay, well, I'm just going to make a note of our conversation because, basically in my head, if something comes up to where the pharmacy tech decides to come up and put more syringes in there or whoever, like there's no way to know who took the syringe or what. And that could be anybody's fault." So I documented and I went on about, my shift. Gave report to the nurse the next morning. And then I think I came back and took care of the patient one more day. But I think that following week is when I was approached by the nursing supervisor in the AM shift. And that's when the accusation had occurred as far as, my license being threatened and things like that. And I can go on more if you would like me to.
Well, exactly what did, or if you can't say verbatim, what did they accuse you of? Was it related to the syringes?
Yes, it was related to the syringes because when the nursing supervisor had approached me, she said, well, the pharmacy tech said that X amount of syringes were stored in the refrigerator, but you documented that. She tried to say that I documented that it was either one syringe, there was one more syringe given or one less giving or something to that extent. But in my charting, like it clearly showed, what I had documented. So I don't know what the confusion was for, but basically they tried to say that I took a syringe, basically, because the pharmacy text count was obviously off because they don't know how many syringes was in the Pyxis. They never had a proper record, because it wasn't in the Pyxis machine.
Mm-hmm.
So
anyone going into the refrigerator had
yeah,
access to these syringes. So
exactly.
tell us what steps you took to defend yourself against the accusation, um, and your experience with your attorney, not detail, but
Mhm.
and your interaction with the board. And before you say that, I just want to say that when this stealing drugs or diverting drugs is a very serious accusation. And so the employer gets involved, the DEA may get involved, the district attorney, of course, the Board of Registered Nurses. It may be considered a felony. You may be asked to go to a diversion program. But the biggest long-term action is they could take action on your RN license and you not be able to work as a registered nurse. So the impact just of an unjust allegation is major.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So just to give more of a backstory as to how the accusation had came up more so, after I had the interaction with the AM supervisor, the nurse supervisor, who's basically a charge nurse, I had told her about, me contacting pharmacy, them not basically storing their narcotics correctly. I had a meeting with the nursing manager with that AM supervisor. Now, during this meeting, the nurse manager's way of rectifying the whole situation was for me to come into the Epic, the charting system, and to falsify documentation. I told them absolutely not because it's their fault. They need to learn from their mistake. So since I didn't do that, they said, "Oh, well, if that doesn't occur, the only way we're going to have to report you." I said, "Go ahead, because this is a problem that you guys have with your hospital. But what I'm not going to do is say something that happened that did not happen. I'm not falsifying documentation. You need to educate your unit and yourself on how to properly store narcotics and take care of patients that, sickle cell patients that have PCAs. That's not my problem."
Mm-hmm.
So after the meeting, I immediately had called my nurse recruiter and I told her I need to get a paper trail on everything that's going on. So I'm sending you detailed information via email as to what's happened, all the red flags and the everything that's basically stopping me from properly doing my job at this hospital. I'm going to send you extensive email saying everything that's going on. And I'm not going back to this hospital because I don't feel safe here. And they're desperate because of the issues they're having with with the state. So that was the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And so, how did you defend yourself? Who did you reach out to?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the first people I reached out to was, of course, my travel nurse agency. So it was my recruiter, and then it was the nurse manager. I mean, not the nurse. They called them. I guess I'm not sure what they called it at this specific agency, but it's basically a clinical manager. They call them clinical managers. So clinical managers deal with any type of issues that arise while you're at on assignment, and they're kind of like your you kind of like your advocate basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I spoke to the clinical manager. She had spoke with the manager from the hospital. I mean, the clinical manager also agreed that, there is red flags to the hospital and, that they are having a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
But, the downfall of I guess since in my situation, the clinical manager is there to work for the agency, not for me. So, the manager from the other hospital was saying that they needed me to come back to the unit because they were so short staffed, this, that, and the other. So I told the clinical manager from my agency, I said, listen, why would I go back to a hospital that is, and why would they want me to come back if I'm supposedly diverting narcotics? I
Mhm.
said, that's something that you would want to, fire somebody for immediately, and you would never want them to come back to your hospital. So I said, I'm definitely not coming back, and them being short staffed is their problem.
Mhm.
So after that situation, it was basically a waiting game of, to see if they were actually going to turn me into the board or not.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so when you received the notice
Uh-huh.
from the board that
Mhm.
an accusation was made against you, what did you do? What?
Well, I mean, it was a waiting game. So I think I got the letter in the mail 2 months later. So at that point, before I had gotten the letter, I had decided who I wanted to basically represent me as my lawyer. So I was able to, contact them immediately. And then that's when, the ball got rolling. Now, it wasn't until probably about like 7 months later until my lawyer actually was able to get involved, because then I had gotten a letter from the investigator from an investigator from the board. So then, you know, that's when we had to submit specific information, for my lawyer to get access to, and for the investigator to have access to, and, just things like that.
So there was a 7 month or 9 month waiting period between the accusation and the the accusation by the hospital, and then the action by the board to say, we're aware of this, and so now you need to start giving us documents and information. During
Yeah,
that time, did you work? During
I
those,
did.
you
Yeah.
were able, you were still able to work. So even though there's an accusation, um, nurses can continue to work until there's a decision
Mhm.
by the board. And so, what was your experience? You had a meeting eventually after all this documentation was submitted. You had a meeting or a hearing with the board. Was it a
Mhm.
public hearing or was it a private hearing?
It was a private hearing. It was basically just, I guess you would say it was a meeting with the investigator, and the investigator, had whatever evidence the hospital decided to submit to try to accuse me of what they were accusing me of. And at that point, me and my lawyer went through all the evidence and basically, you know, rebutted everything, and every piece of evidence that the investigator had was basically, it wasn't really even evidence. It was something that the hospital themselves or the manager themselves could have went and looked at and say, okay, well, she charted this, she charted that, So it was basically just something for them to submit to the investigator. It didn't really show anything.
So it wasn't hard evidence.
No.
And that's another thing that happens with nurses, and I'll put it in here, nurses of color, racial and ethnic nurses. There's an absence of concrete evidence,
Mhm.
and they were able to get that far with an absence of concrete evidence. So let's talk about. I want to interject here for our viewers. So, Ariana has been talking about uh, and describing for us the false accusation that she diverted or stole drugs from a unit that she was assigned to while caring for a patient who had sickle cell anemia.
Mhm.
And so, I want to ask you. I think it's perfect time now to tell the viewers the decision.
It was closed. The case was closed. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that means
No disciplinary action was taken. It was just closed.
it was just closed. So there's nothing on your license. And I looked up your license before we started this interview. Is your license is clean, clear. There's no evidence that anything ever happened. So let's talk about factors that make nurses more vulnerable to these situations. And I asked you this when we talked before the interview. And can you talk about what made you more vulnerable? What you think contributed to this false accusation?
So for one, I'll just put for my patient that had sickle cell and that was on a PCA, there was I can tell that it was a racial issue as to why they were treating my patient the way she was, because for one, unfortunately, from what I've learned at being at this hospital, a lot of hospitals or units do not know how to properly take care of sickle cell patients, and they don't know how to tell if a patient is actually in sickle cell crisis or not. So they'll take, a lot of times, at hospitals, that don't have, I'll just say that are racist, they'll think that a sickle cell patient is actually drug seeking. And that was a big issue with my patient. I remember I had gotten a report from a nurse that was working day shift, and she told me that the attending doctor directly told her, basically in so many words, like, you're drug seeking and you're going to be off of the PCA. We're going to take you off. We're just going to cold turkey, turn the PCA off and take you off of your pump. And in my experience, because I've worked with sickle cell patients, I started out on a hematology oncology unit. So I took care of, oncology patients, mostly leukemia patients. And I also took care of patients with like rare blood diseases. And on our unit, we had a lot of sickle cell patients. And in my experience, you never just, cold turkey take a sickle cell patient off of their PCA pump. Like, there's a transition to where, you decrease their PCA settings and then you transition them over to even oral, pain medications. But you're never supposed to take a patient off just cold turkey. And there's certain labs that you can monitor to know if a patient, is in sickle cell crisis. And they never did that at this unit. Like, I'll say the patient was probably on her pump for maybe a day, and they were already trying to just take her off and send her home, which was very inappropriate. So I think the reason why I was flagged was because, for one, I listened to my patient, and my patient had told me that I'm not on my correct settings on my PCA pump. My hematologist has put in a detailed note as to what settings I'm supposed to be on for my pump. So I spoke to the doctor throughout the night, who was very receptive. And it took us until probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to find the note, but he actually found the note. And then we changed her settings at that point. But before then, I believe when we changed her settings, this was my last day of taking care of the patient. But before then, this patient had to just get like spot doses of boluses up from her PCA pump. So instead of it being a set rate, she was just getting random extra doses of her narcotics to kind of keep her at bay as far as her pain. But that wasn't effective, so.
So you became vulnerable because you were advocating for your patient.
And nobody else was, yeah.
Yes, and lack of understanding, maybe lack of compassion for this disease. So another thing you mentioned to me was that the location of the hospital and the surrounding environment related to substance abuse and how that may have impacted how the hospital looked at you or viewed you. You want to say anything else about that?
Well, looking back, the area that I was in a area that it's known to have, a lot of drug addicts, a lot of drug addicts just in the surrounding area. Now, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, this is something that's going out, on the street, not necessarily in the hospital. But if you take into account, there's actually, people that do divert narcotics and that's how it gets out to the street. Now me thinking back, it's like, okay, it probably was a mistake for me to take an assignment in an area like that. So I think the surrounding area, had a role in that as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we know, I mean, we know this. It isn't a unique experience
Mhm.
for you. It's an unfortunate, but it's not unique that we're stereotyped
Mhm.
about drug use, criminal behavior, and it's unfair.
Mhm.
Studies have suggested that nurses from our ethnic groups may face a disproportionate number of drug diversion accusations. So I I just think that what's happening in society and the stereotypes leak into our practice as well.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do, thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for sharing your triumph because your record is now clean. Um, what advice would you give to someone, valuable lessons that you learn or insights you gain from this experience that you would like to share with other healthcare professionals and nurses,
Mhm.
whether they're experiencing the same challenges, or if they haven't experienced it, most likely they will. So,
Mhm.
what advice would you give?
Well, I think the biggest advice, and there's a lot of I don't want to say a lot, but there's sometimes confusion as to if a nurse should or should not get, any type of insurance to, protect themselves.
Mhm.
And, in actuality, I think they definitely should, because if a situation occurs, a lot of nurses believe that if they're staff, that they'll be protected by the hospital's insurance, which is not true. If it's going to be the hospital or the nurse, they're not going to protect the nurse if it,
Mhm.
it's just it's not going to be in their best interest. So I think the big thing is to get insurance. Also, I believe, look at the surrounding areas that you'll be traveling to as a travel nurse or working as a nurse. Um, if it's a lot of, drug activity, it may or may, probably won't be a good idea for you to work there. I think you have to look at the experience of the nurses on the unit. So, this was during COVID. So a lot of nurses were, quitting their jobs and just leaving bedside in general, or they were going to, travel nursing. So I think if the unit has a lot of travelers, not a lot of experienced nurses, that could be another red flag. I also believe that you just have to look at the character kind of like the people that you're working with on the unit. Now, in the beginning, it's hard to really know because when I was at this hospital, I was only there for a month. So, I couldn't really gauge the character of the people that I was around. But I think it's a lot of factors that, determine, or ways to protect yourself. But I think if you're in an unsafe situation, it's definitely important to get a paper trail. So have everything in writing that has happened since you've been there. Make management aware of it, and definitely if an assignment is unsafe, do not take the assignment. I know at some hospitals, there's a form that you can sign. I think it's an objective what's it called? It's like I think Kaiser has them, but it's basically you objecting to take an assignment because it's unsafe. And if you do take the assignment, your liability is, I guess, in some form waived, or you're more protected.
Mhm.
But I think the big thing is to get whatever's going on in writing.
Mhm. So you mentioned Kaiser. I just want to let the viewers know that this incident did not happen at a Kaiser facility. It did
No.
not happen.
Yes.
Yeah. So I like the administrator is coming and the educators coming out in me right now. And I want to just mention three things, and that is be knowledgeable of the policies and procedures in the hospital or clinic or organization that you're working. Make sure you stay up to date regarding medication administration and your continuing education courses relative to the conditions that you'll be treating. And of course, the six rights of medication administration: the right patient, right medication, right dose, the right time, the right route, and of course, timely and the right documentation. And the last thing I want to add is you see something, say something. So if you see a colleague or someone breaking the rules or diverting drugs or neglecting patients, if you stay quiet as a nurse, you can be charged as being negligent. So you don't want to do that. And patient safety is always paramount for us. So as we come to a close of the time with you, Ariana, what's next? Looking ahead, what do you envision for your nursing career? Or, what goals do you have and aspirations as a result of this experience?
Well, I would say when I first started as a nurse, I really wanted to go and be a nurse anesthetist or a CRNA. And then I looked into other avenues, but I really believe that in nursing, the reason why a lot of nurses are scapegoats for situations like this is because we don't know how to actually protect ourselves or effectively protect ourselves from, legally and things like that. I know in nursing school, they always tell you to cover yourself, but they don't tell us how to cover ourselves. And even as a nurse, they tell you to cover yourself. They don't actually know how to effectively cover yourself. So it's kind of like nurses learn in trial and error, which I don't think is safe at all. I think there should be a dedicated, class, while you're in nursing school, or even, for nurses to take while they're actually out there working, because nurses can be victim to a lot of things, a lot of unjust, accusations, and, we can be the scapegoat for a lot of things. So in place of me getting my, an advanced degree in nursing, I'm considering going to law school because I've seen, and I've researched throughout me going through this how, nurses are really, just put in unfair situations and just, left out to, just to be victim to a lot of issues that happen in, hospitals, or even just even, private things that go on that make nurses, just more likely to, lose their license.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, kudos to you. Bravo to you that you are using this experience, which was traumatic. And we didn't talk about the help you are getting, but you continue to go to therapy
Mhm.
and to support your healing and continue to develop your resilience, and so that you can move forward. And I must say, Ariana, the fact and this decision, this clearing just came down, this ruling just is fresh,
Mhm.
but the fact that you're able to say, okay, I'm going to use my experience to help other nurses is absolutely tremendous. And, I'm not surprised because that's the kind of person you are.
Mhm.
And that's the kind of family you come from. And I'm sorry you had to go through this, but we all have a purpose in life. And maybe you went through this so that you can pay it forward and help other nurses. And viewers, the other thing that I really want to enforce is that not only nurses of color get accused of wrongdoing in nursing. And there are times when nurses who are human make mistakes. So, um, Ariana, I just thank you for coming on the Poetry of Healing and talking about your journey, but more so showing um, and illustrating and being example that even when you go through something so tough, you can be triumphant and also create a purpose that will last forever because you're going to help many nurses.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for taking the time to drop in and talk with me. And we're connected at the hip. So
Mhm.
um, more to come.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Mhm. Okay, now we have just witnessed a powerful journey of a young nurse. And as I mentioned before, just for the ease of her sharing her story, we taped it, recorded it a couple of days ago. So I just played it for you. And I just want to thank Ariana again for her courage to share her experiences and bring to light situations in the clinical areas that can lead to nurses being unjustly accused of diverting or stealing drugs at work. This experience helped Ariana become clear about her purpose, and she will support nurses in a similar situation, nurses in similar situations in the future. So, as we close, I want to read a poem from my book, Regala Healing. I think it kind of solidifies this experience, and it's a brief poem, and it's titled "I Believe Too," and it's on page 121 for those of you who have the book. I believe the time is now. I believe I know how. I believe my spirit is on fire. I believe I am inspired. I believe my purpose revealed. I reveal. I believe that I am healed. And so I ask you, as we close, let's do that breathing exercise we did at the beginning, just one cycle. And that's breathing in through your nose, holding, and breathing out through your mouth. So let's just do one cycle. If you lower your gaze or close your eyes, and we're going to breathe in one and two and three and four. Hold one and two and three and four, and then breathe out one and two and three and four and five. Okay, so we're going to close now. And I just ask you can keep your eyes closed or your gaze lowered and just settle in that calm. I please ask that you join me every first and third Sunday right here, 9 a.m. on blackdoctor.org. And please like and share this program so others can get the benefit of this riveting story and um, successful outcome. Leave comments. I do read and respond, and I'll ask Ariana to do the same. Subscribe so that you can know that new programming has come. And visit my site, regalahealing.com, to learn more about my healing and self care work and resources. And I just want to thank you for joining us today. And I hope that something that was said um, will help you or someone you know. So I'm going to end now bidding you love and light until I see you again. And I'm just going to put up the information about my website. Okay. All right. Thank you.